right. Good evening, LBE community, and welcome to another Live Black Experience Community Dialogue. I am excited to be joined tonight by Mr. Clovers Campbell Jr., who will be speaking to us on the power of the Black press. We're excited for this session. This is definitely a time when there is nothing more important than being able to express and give voice to not only our experiences, but the topics and concerns and issues that are of importance to the Black community, both here in Arizona and across the nation. So we are excited to dive into some discussion of that history, Mr. Campbell's role in that history within the state of Arizona, and just some general discussion about the importance of the Black press. So let me open by introducing you all to our guest, who really should need no introduction. You are well known within the community of Arizona and beyond. But Mr. Cloves Campbell Jr. has spent his entire career with the Arizona Informant newspaper, a family-owned and operated publication in its 53rd year of publishing. As its publisher, the newspaper provides an important voice for the Arizona African American community. Mr. Campbell is active in many civic and business organizations. Currently, he is the executive director for the Arizona Commission of African American Affairs. As the previous chairman of the National Newspaper Publisher Association, a federation of more than 200 Black-owned newspapers, Mr. Campbell led a delegation of African American journalists to meet with Chinese and African government leaders and journalists in Beijing, Xi'an, and Shanghai and Senegal. Mr. Campbell also served 2 consecutive terms in the Arizona State House of Representatives. His past and current civic and community board service include Wells Fargo Community Advisory Board, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, the Arizona Informant Foundation, the Governor's African American Advisory Board, the Attorney General's African American Board, the Arizona African American Legislative Day as a founding member, the Black Theater Troupe, Mountain Park Health Association, South Mountain Village Planning Committee, the Travis L. Williams Post 65, Tanner Chapel AME Church, and the 100 Black Men of Phoenix. Mr. Campbell is also a member of the Greater Phoenix Urban League and a life member of the NAACP. He has been the recipient of numerous recognition awards for his dedicated community service. He attended, is it Pitzer College? Pitzer? Mm-hmm. And majored in political science and received a certificate of completion from the Darden School of Business at University of Virginia. Mr. Campbell has been married to Lynette Campbell for over 30 years. They have 3 adult children, Davon Woods, Shanette Campbell, Clovis Campbell III, and he has 5 grandchildren. Welcome, Mr. Campbell.
Well, thank you. You make me sound really old. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk with those who have logged in.
Wonderful. Well, let's dive right in. I think the first thing that I want to start with is just if you can share what drew you and your family to service as a newspaper publisher and why the Black press is important to you personally.
Well, to start from the beginning, our newspaper was founded in 1971 by my father and my uncle. At the time, my father was in the state Senate here in Arizona. He was the first Black state senator in Arizona. But unfortunately, the daily newspapers didn't want to talk about positive news in our community, be it Phoenix, Flagstaff, Tucson, Sierra Vista, what have you. There was always negative news about African American people, and they also wouldn't cover any of the important legislation and bills that he was trying to get out there. So he decided, hey, let me go out and see if I can start my own newspaper. And luckily, he had found out about the Arizona Informant, which had been founded actually in 1958, but only published 2 issues. He found the owner and said, hey, would you like to sell that publication? And the guy said, yep, how much money you got in your pocket right now? He said, I have $1. He said, well, it's sold. So he bought the name because there was nothing else with it but the name of the Arizona Informant. From there, it's been a labor of love. As a young child, I grew up delivering newspapers, cleaning out the office, selling, advertising, doing whatever it takes to get involved in the publication. So I've been really schooled in the business of publishing and newspaper publishing itself. But our newspaper has been around for 53 years, and our goal is to provide Black history and record the Black history of the community. So every time we come out every week, every issue, there's some news and information that you won't hear in any other publication in the state.
Yeah, and that's so important, I think, because it's such a unique perspective to be able to bring to the table, and it's one that is so often overlooked and not really reported on. And you shared that with your family, going back to the first Black senator founding this or taking over this paper, because of that lack of coverage of those legislative issues and so forth. And your own career kind of spans both that press coverage and the political sphere. So I'm curious how you see those two areas interacting or overlapping, or do they share that importance to you, or just how do they engage?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that our community understands the issues surrounding politics, surrounding government affairs, and surrounding those types of legislation that have some effect, whether positive or negative, on them. And so to be able to share that information, to talk about the heroes and the sheroes of our neighborhoods and our communities, it's a perfect mix for myself. I think that didn't realize what I was going to be doing when I was throwing that first newspaper out into someone's yard. But at the same time, it gave me a time to bond with my father from the age of 10, 11 years old up until he passed away, actually passed away at the office itself. So I think it's important that our community understands the political issues, understands those issues handling at the government level, and the fact that we can share them with them in a positive manner. And sometimes we have to report the bad news. But at the end of the day, it is something that is definitely necessary. And I feel fortunate to be able to sit in the situation that I am now.
Can you talk more about why that positive representation is so important?
Yeah, well, when my dad started or restarted the publication, the goal was to be that voice for the community. We hadn't had it because a few years earlier there were two other Black-owned newspapers in Arizona, but they ceased publishing. So there was a void, and he came about and decided to fill it. I think that as what he saw was the fact that we needed to grow and to be able to be a part of a larger organization. He was already a part of his own fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi, and he did a lot of work with some of his friends outside of Arizona just to see about not only political issues, but also how to publish a newspaper. From that span, our membership with the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is the oldest Black organization for newspapers in the country. We became members back in 1972, and we've been members ever since. My dad served on that board of directors for several years. I ended up following his footsteps to serve on that board for several years, and continued to work in the capacity as a former chairman of that organization for 4 years. And our goal is to make the Black press of the United States the premier news and information center for Black information throughout the country and out the world.
I'm curious, as you talk about being that premier source of that perspective, what your views are on the separate representation. So even just the fact that we have to have a Black press versus the broader media perspective, is that a positive to you that we have that distinct voice, or is it a challenge, or I don't want to call it a problem, but is it challenging that need exists even in the first place?
Well, it is a challenge, but it is something that is needed. I think as you see how the digital space has grown, how people can manipulate images, information at the touch of a key, I think it's important that we do our best to preserve our history and to preserve our the things that are accomplishments of Black folks. Like Frederick Douglass said, we choose to plead our own cause. That meaning, if we're going to talk about issues in our community, we're going to be the ones to talk about them and write about them. Right now, there is a really intense attempt to whitewash history here in America. And when I say whitewash, changing the way history is taught, or not even teaching the true historical facts that have happened, particularly to our African American people, our African American communities, and our African American ancestors. So we have to be in the position to preserve our history, tell our history the way it has actually happened, and not let other people tell our story for us.
I love that you brought that up, because that was actually almost my next question was about the those first issues of Freedom's Journal, and that quote of "Too long have others spoken for us. We wish to plead our own cause."
Absolutely.
So, what would you say to just that ongoing need for venues in which to plead our own cause and speak for ourselves? Because there are those today that are saying that that's, divisive, or that we're perpetuating that separation by insisting on these unique spaces. So what would you say to that?
Well, I think that that is some folks' own opinion, those who want to control and to define what history has done for us or has done to us as a community, and what other folks in their history has done, whether it's positive or negative. Right now, we see an attempt to continue to manipulate history, to change the story. We had one case in Texas where our brother newspapers there and sister newspapers were challenging the educational system because they were printing books and had already started to distribute these textbooks to students, which basically said that slavery never happened. It actually said that Black folks chose to get on ships and come to America in search of jobs. That was the way they defined our matriculation to the United States. That is the farthest thing from the truth that you can ever imagine. But if you continue to let people try to manipulate and define our history and act as though it never happened, then there will never be a true account of what happened to us in this country, and how people who have done some bad things to folks, not only Black folks, but other minorities, need to be held accountable and need to have that story told so that their ancestors and their children know that the reason why they have trust funds, the reason why they have a family wealth and generational wealth is because they did it on the backs of Black folks. When you talk about things like the Wilmington incident or the Tulsa riots or the Tulsa massacre, those things happened. But we never found out about them in our textbooks, at least when I was coming up as a young man or as a kid. But now we're being able to talk about them, understand that they actually happened, and let people know that some folks weren't the greatest people in the world. And so we have to let people understand that things have happened to us that they should be ashamed of, but they need to learn from. Because history, if you let it, and they say it all the time, it repeats itself. That is a part of history that we do not want to repeat.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important and interesting what you raise about the narrative that was coming out in those textbooks. I'm reading a book right now called, I believe it may just be called Madness, about the history of a Black asylum that was built in Maryland in the post-Civil War era. And one of the things that is discussed in some of the earlier chapters is that narrative that was beginning to be perpetuated of really shifting the narrative in terms of what slavery was and what it did for Black people. And in particular, the narrative was that freedom was what was leading to the perceived mental illness and insanity of freed Black people who didn't know what to do with it and were seen as not having that structured work environment, which is how slavery was cast. And so the formation of this asylum was really based in providing that structured work again. They built their own mental institution and then worked that land as their therapy. And so I just think it's so important to talk about the way that narratives are controlled and the ability of something like the Black press to offer alternative narratives and to shift that power dynamic. So can you speak to that a little bit as well?
Definitely. I think that it's not an alternative narrative that we're preaching. It is the truth. Then we talk about what we're telling our community, what we're telling our children, what we're telling the entire world is that, the information and the records that we have of what has happened to our people is actual historical fact. And when you talk about these other types of narratives or these other perspectives coming out to play, it's an attempt again to manipulate, to control, and to enslave our minds again. And if we continue to let that happen, we'll be in trouble. As you see now, again, there is a big push in Florida and here in Arizona to remove a lot of the Black history from our books and our teachings. You actually get penalized, or if you're a teacher and you teach about African American history or anything like it in Arizona, you will lose your job as a teacher. You will lose everything you have. All your credentials will be removed from you. And so where we're talking about things like that, we really have to understand that, is it a threat to some folks to understand that people want to know about the true historical facts that have happened in this country? Or is it the attempt, as some people say, the paranoia of some white folks to start having more people included in the structure of wealth, in the structure of financial wealth, and mental health, to where we're all almost on the same level? Some people are still paranoid about that. And case in point, we have a bill here right now that's going through the legislature that, and it's a simple bill that should be a no-brainer to anybody who has any type of conscience. And this bill basically says that they want to remove all of those pieces of information or statutes, or not statutes, but references to the fact that a certain parcel of land in Arizona can only be sold to somebody white. Okay, so that makes sense. It's already illegal to have that piece in there, but now people just want to remove it from legal documents, things that are already recorded at the state level and at the city level and at the county level. There are some legislators who do not want that language removed from these deeds and property deeds. And so when you think about things like that, what is the reason for supporting or not supporting this legislation? It's because they still want to hold on. They still want to be able to control, and they feel that that's a piece of their history. Maybe they are proud of it, but it doesn't mean anything, but we still want it removed because it is a sign of some of the things from the past that weren't happy for us.
That's such an interesting topic in itself because as you were talking about it, I kept thinking that you were going in a slightly different direction there, in saying that it shouldn't be removed to show that that history was truly part of Arizona's history, but then is leaving it in there, just perpetuating that part of it, even though it's considered illegal. So, and I think it's so important to have those types of conversations as well, because I can tell you, I hadn't heard about that piece of legislation. And I know there are probably a lot of other people who haven't heard about it either, at the same time as we're having these huge national conversations about the cost of housing and housing development and all of these sorts of things. Um, it just strikes me how important it then becomes for having things like the Black press that bring those topics forward, and any press agencies that bring those things forward to remind us not only that these things are happening now, but where that legislation came from, why we're in the situation, even with housing that we are, that was built on those prejudicial practices of the past.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you talk about how do we continue to inform our communities, had it not been or had it not be for the Black press, there would be no discussion on these issues. And a lot of our people, just like you say, are unaware of some of these things that are going on. I think it's important that we report on these bills, these pieces of legislation that are being introduced, that if you're not into the business of politics, and if you don't sit at the Capitol, or if you don't watch the committee hearings and the votes on the floor on your cable TV, you got 2,000 other channels to look at. Why would you sit there and look at that? But somebody has to be able to share that information to inform our community, so that we make sure that if it's time for us to stand up and become united, then there's a call to action, and we'll be the one to do the calling.
Absolutely. In preparing for our conversation tonight, I was looking at the history of the Black press, and um, one of the articles that I was looking at was making a clear line or link between uh, the the development of the Black press as a voice of expression for the Black community, and really interestingly connecting that to the history of the Black church and other social and fraternal organizations within the Black community. And it was just talking about that sense of united voice and the shift from more of those oral traditions into the written tradition. So, can you talk about, in your view, what differentiated the press or print communication from that oral tradition, and why that was such an important shift to start happening within the Black community?
Well, let me kind of preface my remarks by quoting Mr. Dick Gregory, who spoke to one of our newspaper events in Chicago one year. And he said that the three pillars, or the three legs of a table for the Black community, are a strong Black church, a strong Black woman, and a strong Black press. And when he said that, he basically talked about what it takes to keep our communities together and to keep our communities informed on issues of concern. Now, when you talk about how do we relate all of these issues, and how do they work together? I think the fact that when we move from the oral testimonies and the oral history that we get, that people have a tendency to give, we lose something in the translation. But when we have it written, or if we have the opportunity to record it via film, or nowadays with all of the opportunities with different devices to utilize, I think it's important that not only do we continue to write it, because at the same time, even though we're recording and we're talking right now, at any time someone can push a button, change my face, change my words, do whatever they want to, and that history is now manipulated. But they can't come in and take my newspaper and tell me what to write, or come back and take from what we already printed about. They can't remove that from history. It's a written piece of history. It's a document that stands the test of time. Just like at the end of the day, when you talk about people showing or want to have you have proof of something that has happened or something that is done, 9 times out of 10, they're going to ask you for a printed document. Whether you go to court, whether you're spending money at a bank, whether you're doing anything, there's always that need for a printed document to show some proof. And I think that our proof is in the Black press and the information that we put into it.
We had a question come in from an audience member who was wanting to hear more about Black children in foster care in Arizona. Is that something that you can speak to?
Actually, yes. I've been working with several of our leaders to discuss the issue of our overrepresentation of African American kids in foster care, and then not even the overrepresentation, but the lack of support that our children receive once they get into the foster care system. Also, the method in which they are putting our children into the foster care system is totally racist, totally unfair, and totally needs to be addressed immediately. You talk about the fact that we have families who want to adopt one of their own family members' child because of the fact that maybe the family member who they're from is not able to do that. Instead of that family being able to take that child and then bring it through the real family tree that they're a part of, they're taking these children and giving them, letting the white people adopt our Black children. Once our Black children are adopted, we run into issues like these folks don't know how to take care of our kids. They don't know how to comb their hair. They don't know how to give them proper hygiene, what to feed them. It's insane. So there is a major, major problem. And I know I'm working with former Senator Leah Landrum Taylor and former Mayor Coral Evans just about these issues as we go directly to the Director of Child Services at the state of Arizona. So it is an issue of concern. It's one that we're addressing not only in the Black press, but also as the chairman or as the executive director of the Commission of African American Affairs. We're taking these issues directly to the governor.
Yeah, and that's such a, I don't even know what the word is for it, but all I want to say is that it's a fascinating challenge and struggle to be seeing, especially with the ongoing conversations about the importance of kinship in foster care, in particular among other communities. Particularly, you hear that a lot when it comes to Indigenous communities and the care for children that are have the opportunity to go to either family members or just relatives within the community, whether by blood or just by the nature of being in the community.
Yes.
So with that being such a huge focus, it is at the very least, I think the kindest word that I can say is fascinating to me, that would be the challenge that we're facing within the state. And I would suspect probably broader within Black communities when it comes to the foster care system.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that it is the beginning of the destruction of Black families and Black communities when they can take our children away from them at such an early age and not give them the opportunity to know who they are, not get the proper support that they deserve from being with kinfolk and kinship families. It's a beginning of a snowball effect. Once a child, an African American child, is in this system, they continue to flourish or not flourish in the system and end up getting into other sections of the system, which are obviously negative when we start talking about correctional facilities and things like that. So the lack of support that they get from these so-called adopted families that don't understand the culture of these children ends up having them in the wrong situations, which ends up having them in the correctional system, which keeps us in that perpetual situation of disparity and this disparity and not being able to have anything to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the other part of that that's so fascinating to me is just the overlap when it comes to that systemic disconnection for particularly our Black youth when it comes to what they are enabled to experience within their communities. So if you're talking about the foster care system and not being able to be brought up within households that are reflective of their cultural identity, if you're talking about the social resources that are provided to communities of color and the lack of resources that historically have been made available to particularly Black communities, but other communities of color. And then you pair that with pieces of legislation like what we talked about earlier, the legislation that was coming through over the past couple of years when it comes to teaching of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the so-called teaching of critical race theory, which we all know was not actually happening in elementary schools, but still just the attempts to keep that knowledge out of the hands of particularly our youth and particularly Black youth seems very telling. To you, is that reflective of maybe a moment that we're in or even returning to in this country's narrative when it comes to the Black community in particular?
Well, I think that this suppression of information that you're talking about is definitely the attempt by some folks to go back to what they call the good old days. Those good old days were anything but for us.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that as they continue to attempt to suppress our information, suppress our history, and perpetuate their own way of thinking and their own way of putting history together, you see that they're attempting to just control the outcome of future generations. So if our children are not learning about not just Martin Luther King, but I'm talking about Matthew Henson, or I'm talking about George Washington Carver, or I'm talking about Percy L. Julian, those types of folks are people that are real history and real heroes in our history that outside of our community, our children are never going to know those folks' names. And if they don't know about that history, the fact that our Black people were dealing with hearts and dealing with blood issues and doing some things in the laboratories, we'll never know. And so it's incumbent upon us as Black publishers and the Black press of America to every month, not just every month, every week or every day, put out information that shows that our Black community has some positive history that our children need to learn and can be proud of.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating to me as well when it comes to the history of the Black press is, at least in terms of the first official um, uh, publication, being in 1827, which is almost 40 years before the enactment of the Emancipation Proclamation. uh, there was that perceived need for those avenues for the Black community to share our own stories and those accurate and meaningful stories of Black life, and sharing and giving voice to the Live Black experience as frameworks for the issues of importance to not only the Black community, but also the broader community conversations. But what I think really strikes me in the history of the Black press is that it was freed Black people who founded that first paper, but this was at a time when so many of our ancestors were not free. And one of the number one things that was done to keep us uh, from pursuing freedom or from engaging in those ideas of liberation was enacting those laws that prevented us from learning to read or write. So the fact that that first Black newspaper was founded in 1827 just seems very telling to me in terms of the work that we were doing as the Black community to ensure that that voice was not silenced, but also to enact that as a form of freedom for others.
Well, I think that, when there is the old saying, when there's a will, there's a way. And even though our folks were beaten and persecuted just for learning how to read, there were still individuals that were working just as we've always have done to make sure that our lessons were being taught to each other, We were reading in secret. We didn't let people know that we knew how to read. But as time moved on, and as an abolitionist like Frederick Douglass was, and as articulate as he was, and it was almost impossible to suppress his voice. And once he got a hold of a pen and a piece of paper and found out that there were other folks and knew that other folks were going to be able to read his message, particularly our folks, he already knew that those non-Black people were watching everything that he did. So he was bold in his statements. He was honest in his feelings, and he was direct in what he thought needed to be done. And what other better way to be able to articulate your message than through the pen and the paper?
Mm-hmm. You know, I noted as I was drafting some of the questions for tonight that it's Black History Month. Of course, we all have to think back to the famous Gil Scott-Heron saying that the revolution will not be televised, but certainly I would say the Black press has made it evident that it will be written. And so I am curious how you see the Black press serving as a revolutionary act. How is it perpetuating that fight for freedom and that ongoing need for those revolutionary voices to speak that truth into our society?
Well, the first thing you have to realize is that when we talk about the Black press and NNPA, we're talking about Black-owned media. Now, there are a lot of outlets that carry information about African Americans. There are a lot of outlets that carry stories and write stories about us that are not coming from us. Now that we have this AI issue coming up, you have artificial intelligence trying to rewrite history. And so when we talk about what you just mentioned, is how is it affecting the way the Black press works? I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to utilize our voice to continue to get our stories told. It's important that we are now utilizing every platform available to us. So every Black newspaper is encouraged to have all of the digital properties, the social media properties, et cetera, to access the younger generation. Of course, they're all attuned to working with electronic information, electronic data, electronic devices. What we're trying to do is create an opportunity where they go back and forth to look at a newspaper, then to go look at information on a electronic device. One of the things we're trying to do right now is to encourage more students and more African-American young people to submit information to us, to give us an opportunity to write about them so that they see themselves in print. Every kid can look at himself on his cell phone 350 days the year, 365 days of the year. They can take pictures of themselves 25 times a day. They can post up a whole lot of information on Facebook. But how many have seen something where they won the state championship and they're printed in the Black press? And I think that once you get an opportunity to have children start seeing themselves printed and doing positive things, not just on the digital space, but in a permanent printed space, I think that's our challenge, is to make sure we create the next generation of Black press readers.
And I think you brought up a really important distinction when we're talking about the Black press. What we're talking about tonight is the Black-owned publications and media outlets. And I think for the benefit of our audience, I will ask, what is the importance of making that distinction? Or in differentiating between the publications and sources that are owned by us and others that are representing the voice, but not necessarily part of the community?
Well, I think it's kind of simple to me. The fact that some folks, once they think they have control of an audience, and particularly an African-American audience, a Black audience, they want to manipulate the thought process. They want to manipulate the type of information that they're consuming, and it can be tailored to their thinking. Now, case in point is Bob Johnson owned BET for many, started BET for many years. He got to the point where he grew and he wanted the money. I can't be mad at him for wanting the money. He sold BET to a larger white company. The first thing they did was get rid of all of the important BET programming that would inform African Americans. They got rid of BET News. They got rid of BET Focus. They got rid of BET opportunities to talk about anything that was in the Black community. Brought on more music programming, less informational programming. So when you look at what they did, what they basically did was take away any information outlet that was there on a televised network and changed it up and put in more entertainment information so that they could make money. So in essence, we lost out on a whole network of news just because Bob Johnson wanted some more money. I can't be mad at him, but that's the process that you look at. Same things happened with Essence Magazine, where at one point it was purchased by a non-African American. Since then, some black men have bought it back, and the focus has come back, because at a time when we needed to have support for our African American women, we needed to have something like Essence Magazine to get that information out. So now it is Black owned again. So I think it's important that you have the voice that is controlled by the people behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, and there's been so many conversations, particularly this month. And I think it's really interesting that it's been so prevalent on social media in sharing of articles either about the Black community or coming from the Black community. Just the amount of vitriol and negative backlash that comes to that representation of Black voice. And by that, I mean just the whether it's a negative comments that are starting to fill those feeds on the articles that have nothing to do with the content itself, but are just calling out the source as being racist or divisive or anything like that, or the attempt to discredit them as being not the sources that people should go to or trust for newsworthiness because of being Black publications or focusing on a Black narrative. I'm curious to you if that is, again, speaking to just the times that we're in, or that perceived threat of that Black voice and representation.
Well, it's a little bit of both. The times that we're in, like I said, there's more information sources out there than ever before. So people can try to manipulate the information and the news sources that they put out. One of the things that has always bothered me, and the fact that non-Black people always try to identify who they think our Black leadership should be in our community. And I think that is one of the worst things that can happen to us. Of course, we'll put out our top community advocates when we put out our 50 over 50 or 50 40 under 40, etc. But to have a white daily newspaper come and tell us who they have decided are our up and coming Black leaders in our community, that tells me that they're trying to describe and tell us who they want to have to lead us. And these folks are being led by them. So when you talk about being in control of your destiny, being in control of the information, when we have organizations like that try to tell us who our leaders are, when I know who my leaders are in my city, in my state, and I look up and they say, okay, well, you got Joe Blow over here. And I say, Joe Blow's a damn fool. But in our community, he's a fool. In your community, you're trying to make him be the star of the show. So, I think it is a sign of the times that, I think it's partly to do with paranoia from a lot of white folks. And go back to once President Obama was elected, we had so much, I was in the legislature here at the time, we had so much anti-affirmative action, not even DEI, but set-aside programs. Anything that had to do with helping people and minorities was totally taken off the books. I mean, we don't have here in Arizona, we don't have affirmative action. They're trying to get rid of diversity and inclusion right now. The legislature has put into effect any any organization that receives state funding cannot have a DE&I a component to their business. So that is systematically removing any opportunity for people to advance in business or the financial industries or the housing industries as well, just because of the fact that they're creating legislation that takes money out of their hands, even though this is our state money. So, yeah, I think there is a major issue. I think that we as Black folks need to understand what this issue is and don't get caught up as my friend Jesse Jackson says, everybody's doing their own thing right now, mixing in and thinking everything's great. He says, don't get caught up in the illusion of inclusion. And so when you say that, don't keep drinking the Kool-Aid because it's not always going to be sweet.
Wow. I like that. I like that a lot. I needed to have written that down. I'm going to grab it from the recording too. We've just been talking about we need to start putting together like bags and shirts with some of the top quotes from these presentations, and that is certainly one of them. So thank you for that. I keep thinking about that control of power when it comes to the narratives that are being broadcast through the legislature and even through the press and just in general in society these days. And I have two questions, so I'll start with this one. We're all probably familiar with that phrase, the power of the press. And I'm curious how you see the Black press giving power to not only the Black community, but also to those broader marginalized voices within society, and how you see it as whether it's balancing or redistributing those past and current powers structures, or is it something beyond that attempt to rebalance power?
Well, let me go back to what we just talked about to get where we want to go to now. And the fact that, once again, people have to legitimize our information, our sources, before we can say that this is actually what's going on. So when people call you and say, hey, we've got you owe a bill. This is what you owe on a certain thing. We have that you owe this money. You didn't pay it. Well, just as easily, I say, I have a bill. I've created my own paperwork that says I have a bill. So who's going to be right? Just because you're white makes my information less important or less obvious and less right than yours. So moving on forward, we had an issue with the Black press where we were trying to get some advertising and marketing dollars from the automobile industry. I was at a time when all of those automobile industries were failing, and yet they were getting government bailout money from President Obama to save their industry. So what they did with a lot of their money was start to market their products, start to say, hey, we're building a better product now. Come buy our Ford cars or our General Motors cars. But they weren't using some of that advertising dollars to spend in the Black community. And they said we had no proof as to how many people were reading our newspaper, how many people were spending our Black dollars, where our Black dollars were going. So what we did was we went to the Nielsen Corporation, which is the information company that puts out all kind of information about spending habits, TV habits, etc. And we partnered with them to do a study about Black spending habits. I know that everybody's seen this study. We initiated this study from the Black press that basically ended up telling folks, after looking at all the demographics and the things, how we spend our dollars over here on this product, what we do on this product, it ended up showing that Black people spend over $3 trillion a year. And this was back in 2012 when we did this study. And they couldn't believe it. All of a sudden, everybody's utilizing the NMPA Nielsen study to talk about how Black people market their dollars. Now they're talking about how they can get money to their own companies and their organizations. from that spawned not only our Nielsen study on African American consumers, you had a study on Hispanic consumers came out, a study on Native Americans consumers came out, a study on women came out, and a study on the LGBT community came out. All of that because we had to prove that we knew that we had dollars and we were spending, and we had to make them spend some of that federal government money with us. So when you talk about when we do something, how does it affect our community and other communities? That's one great example.
Yeah. We had another question come in about a bill that mandates that in junior high, you can learn about the Holocaust, but the fact that you cannot speak to the impacts of slavery. I think you touched on that a little bit in terms of the textbooks in Texas, but that's a bill out of Arizona, if I'm not mistaken. And so, can you speak to the implications of that? And
well, it's again an attempt to direct and to tell people what is history and what is not history by the fact that, hey, I have no problem with the learning more about the Holocaust and seeing what the damage done to human beings, the Jewish community as a whole. We actually took a group to Berlin, Germany, a few years back to visit Checkpoint Charlie and all those locations where they had. We saw dozens and dozens and dozens of photos of people thrown into ditches, naked bodies strewn everywhere, children's bodies. The Holocaust was horrible, and I have no problem with that. But why only the Holocaust that we can talk about? Why can't we talk about what happened here in America with our enslavement and our issues? It's because of the fact that the Holocaust, one, is some other people in Germany doing things against Jewish people. And it's something that doesn't target the United States and the history of the United States because of the fact that all that happened in Germany. So what they're doing is saying, okay, all those bad things happened in Germany to Jewish people. We understand that. But we're not going to recognize the fact that what we did to Black folks in the United States is a crime as well. And so it's a two-edged sword. One way you want to look good to everybody, but on the other way, you want to neglect and not tell the truth about the history of what white folks did to Black people in this United States. So I think, on one hand, they try to get you to be sensitive about the bill. And on the other hand, you want to say, but what about everybody else? What about a bill that teaches real issues about Native American history, about all these wars that we had coming in and taking over Native land from people? So that's the intrinsic things that happen in politics, is where the bill looks good on the outside, but when you cut it open, then you see that there's a whole lot of other issues that make it a reason why not to vote for it. But then when you do not support the bill, you look like you don't supporting the Holocaust, when in actuality, it's a bill that says we're only supporting the Holocaust, but we're not going to recognize anybody else's history. So that's the games that they play up at 1700 West Washington.
Well, and that takes me back to the second question when it comes to the power dynamics that are involved in this sort of education and information dissemination and so forth. What do you think is the perceived threat of Black knowledge, Black connection to identity, and just there's that whole movement of, don't say Black. We can talk about anything as long as it's not specifically linked to the Black community or that history of Black knowledge and identity. So why is that such a threat to things in this country?
Well, I think it goes again back to what I said earlier about a white paranoia, the perceived threat of losing control of something that they've controlled for so long. I think it's the fact that, there are great people of all races in this state and in this country, but there are some, and there are those few that feel as though they're losing the grip on things. You see that they're fighting to keep people from coming into this country right now. And understandably, there are some bad people coming in. But the same thing happened back many years ago in our country when people were coming over from other countries and immigrants and ships coming through New York Harbor, coming in and they were being welcomed. You had Irish people, you had people from all different countries coming to this United States. So now that everybody seems to be in their certain comfortable niche, that they do not want anybody else to invade their space. And I think that as things become more equal, as things become more viable for everyone to get a piece of the pie, there are those folks who are paranoid about basically losing control of what they've had control of for so long.
Absolutely. So speaking of some of those power dynamics, not only in the press, but also in the legislature, can you speak about the lack of Black representation and policy leadership at the state capitol?
We got a real policy person asking these questions right now. But yes, I mean, there has always been a lack of African Americans, not only in the elected capacity, but also definitely in the policy area as well. I think that as you see both parties, Democrat and Republican, the one thing that's consistent is that at the Capitol, there are not a whole lot of us. And when I say us, you know what I'm talking about. We just got two people who were not elected but appointed to the legislature that are African American, and then we have one on the Republican ticket that was elected to the legislature. And there has been some issue about how he wants to participate in anything that has to go on with the African American community. There are some folks, and he's one of those on that Republican side, and that says that that's a divisive thing to have us talk about Black and white. Well, that's his own prerogative. That's his perspective, and I respect that. But to your point, there has always been a deficiency of African Americans, definitely on the staff. When you talk about policy and everything else, I think right now in the legislature we probably have one, if not more than that, in the senior staff now for the Senate. So. I know that Governor Hobbs has some people on some key individuals, African Americans in key spaces in her cabinet and on her, well, not in the cabinet, but on her team. Deputy chief of staff, some senior policy advisors, things like that. So there are some strides being made, but they're baby steps. There's a whole lot more that needs to be done. And the one thing that concerns me is that why is it that some districts and some areas of the cities, they expect us to vote for a white candidate, but when we vote for a Black candidate, they don't want to vote for the Black candidate. And that's a real problem that I have with the system that we have right now, is that it's okay for us to go out and say we're going to support the white guy, but it's not really that okay in some areas of this state for some people to say, I'm not voting for him just because he's Black. So we still have some issues and we still have some ground to cover. But, being here for over 60 years, understanding where we come from, we still have a long way to go, but we have done some things positive.
Well, and speaking of that, those baby steps and that progress and the potential for further progress, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the upcoming election that we'll be facing, because it's going to be a big one no matter what. But what are your views about it in general?
Well, I think it's a typical election coming up again. We have the presidential campaign. We have some of the basic rhetoric coming out. We have some movement in our congressional body, especially on the Senate side. Also, definitely in the House of Representatives, with some of our candidates moving and shifting to go after other spaces. But at the end of the day, we as the Black community must continue to put out an agenda that these candidates have to support if they want our support. In the past 10 years, every 2 years, we put out an Arizona African American agenda, and it states some of the issues, all of the issues, whether it's health, housing, education, financial issues, etc. We've outlined what we as an Arizona community deem important to the Black folks here. And it's not just been one person putting this agenda together. It's been a group, a huge group of people from all over the parts of this state to say what's important to Black folks in Arizona. Because what is happening in Flagstaff is clearly not the same thing that's happening down in Phoenix, or what's going on in Tucson or Maricopa or Glendale or El Mirage. So we have to be able to get information and ideas and thoughts from everybody Black in the entire state, not just in Maricopa County. And also the fact that we have new people moving into the state at record numbers. I've been here for a long time, and I've seen our population and Black folks grow. We, at one point, they said we were 4%. Now they're talking about we're 6%. I think we're closer to 11 or 12%, just because of the number of people I've seen and the influx of people I've seen come in over the last 10 years. So we have to get these candidates to understand what our issues are, and don't vote for them if they don't say they're going to support these issues. Because 10 times out of 10, when Black people scream for something, everybody else also benefits at the same time.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that last point up, because there is something that feels very core within the broader Black community to that sense of community, connectedness, and oneness. That what we do for one, we're doing for all. The idea of Ubuntu, that I am because we are, and so forth. So can you speak to how the Black press helps to capture and create that sense of community and connectedness, and how we can and should be supporting that at the local level, at the state level, and beyond?
Sure. I think, that Black folks are just like any other race. And that is that you have conservative Black folks, you have liberal Black folks, you have aggressive Black folks, you have LGBT Black folks, we're just like anybody else. We have everything. The key part is for our community to understand is that at the end of the day, when we start talking about our issues and how we face them in our community, our publications give out all those various perspectives. I'm saying that I don't just not talk about what's happening in the conservative part of our community. I also talk about what's happening with our liberal part. We give both perspectives on that, but we also give perspectives on what our LGBT community is concerned about, as well as what our younger community is concerned about, and also what our elderly community is concerned about. So we try to provide a platform for our community as a whole, regardless of what your thought pattern is, or where you're thinking, or where you're going, or your political preference. With that being said, we have to understand that we still are looked upon as Black. At the end of the day, when you walk out that door, when you go into a building, when you walk into a restaurant, you may be all these other things, conservative, you may be liberal, you may be gay, you may be whatever, but the first thing they're going to see when you walk in there and ask for service is that you're Black. And so when we talk about what the Black press does, is that we support Blackness first. And the fact that at the end of the day, we're going to always be able to relate, because we all know that they're going to treat us the way as if we're Black people. Just like when all Black people walk in a room, this is the common thought is that, hey, when I walk in and I see another Black guy, I give him a head nod. Okay. And people say, well, what is that? I said, and I'm talking about white people. What is that? I said, that's just acknowledging that we're both in the same place. But we do that all the time. But when we talk about where the Black press is supposed to be with our community, we support our community, and we support the fact that we have varying views, but we still are going to be Black at the end of the day.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I appreciate your time and your insights, and just being able to have this conversation with you. It's truly an honor for me, and I am sure our community is going to uh, to glean a lot from it. I'd love to close out with just that question of what are the next steps for us as an Arizona community, and particularly in terms of what the broader community needs to do to recognize and support the voice of the Black press and the Live Black experience in Arizona, and how you see us moving from those baby steps to larger leaps forward.
Well, first I'd say that we need to really, as a local native Arizonan, and for those of us that are local and native, we really need to welcome the the brothers and sisters that come from other parts of this country or come from another country in general. I think that it's important that we all come together. Not all of us are from here. Not everybody is from Chicago, Atlanta, Detroit. But I think that we need to embrace each other and make sure that we come together, because our community is only as strong as the individuals in it. And if we don't work together to achieve anything, they will continue to splinter us off, divide us, conquer us, and we will have no progress at all. Secondly, I think that when we talk about where Arizona is going and how do we be a part of it, I think that the main thing is that those organizations, our Black organizations, need to come together. I think that, hey, we can have the head of every organization you want come to the table and have their own specific concerns heard and talked about. But regardless of what it is, we still have to respect each other. And I think that when we start talking about what this organization is doing, or this is my organization, once again, we're being splintered off and divided and conquered, instead of us saying, okay, there's a big enough pie for everybody to eat some. But we still have to be able to understand that what he's doing over here is his thing. What she's doing over here is their organization's thing. But they all are doing things that are worthwhile for our Black community. So we really need to look at what we're doing amongst ourselves first. And then finally, I think that, we have to understand that we are Black first. We're going to be looked at, like I said earlier, when you walk in the room, you're Black. When I was on the legislative floor, when I was in the state representative, I was the only Black person in out of 60 people. It was me. So whenever something came up about Black people, every head in that room turned toward me. The same thing happened to my dad back in the 60s as the first Black state senator. Anything that happened Black, they looked right at him. So we have to be able to, one, make sure that we are cognizant of what our folks need and what they want, but also make sure that we're voicing the opinions of everybody that we represent. Because at the end of the day, it's not just February that we're going to talk about Black history. We talk about Black history every week of the year.
Thank you so much. This, again, has been a joy of a conversation, and I hope that our audience is listening and paying attention and able to take this forward into those ongoing conversations, because you are absolutely right. This is not just a conversation for Black History Month, but for every single day of the year. And it is such an honor for me to be part of working with the Live Black experience and bringing these conversations forward to not just the Flagstaff community, but the broader Arizona community, to our national community, and even the fact that we have had an international audience even on these sessions wanting to learn and engage tells me that there is hope for the conversations that we're having, and hope that we have that opportunity to make those larger leaps when it comes to the narrative of our nation and the stories that we tell and the history that we acknowledge. So I want to say thank you to you again for being willing to join us and have this conversation. And as we always close out, I just want to take a moment to thank our audience for joining in, for participating, for watching and listening. And more importantly, I think beyond just listening and hearing this conversation, taking it and carrying it forward into your networks and your community and making sure that it's an ongoing conversation. We are grateful to everyone that joins us for these conversations and who keeps that conversation going. So until next time, as we always say with the Live Black Experience, be well and go in grace.
Thank you for having me.